The reviews are also important for care providers or service providers because they know that their client has to go back to court in a certain number of days and tell the judge what's happened. So I'm finding referrals happen very quickly now. Follow-up happens very quickly now because that person is going to go back to court and tell the judge that, nope, nothing's happened. And the judge, myself, has been known to pick up the phone right there in the courtroom and call the office and find out why the referral hasn't been made. It's a bit of a wake-up call. And I have to tell you, on one occasion I called an office and we were on a speakerphone and the receptionist thought that it was a crank call from a radio station. Anyway, it makes life very interesting. In the 3.5 years, the results have greatly exceeded my expectations. And I want to tell you about 4 people. They're typical of the people who have come through the court. The first one is a woman who was at the time, and she was one of the early participants in the court. At the time, she was in her early 30s. She was a single parent with 3 children, and the youngest was a special needs child. The special needs child was not yet school age, and her 2 children at the time, I believe, were in grades 2 and 4. I might be off by a grade. The woman had a criminal record, and a lengthy one, and mostly for shoplifting and breaching court orders. When she came to First Nations court, she was appearing on 3 more shoplifting charges. That was troubling. But what was even more troubling was that she was using the baby stroller and the baby and the children as part of the shoplifting exercise. I found that very worrisome. In any other court, she would have been facing a lengthy jail sentence, and by that I mean about 5 to 6 months in jail. She would have lost her children. They would have been removed and put into foster care. She did have a drug habit, but as she said, I don't have enough money to buy drugs I'm not using. Her reason for stealing was that she and her children were hungry, or she and her children needed clothing. She just didn't have the money. And she was being very truthful, very candid. Those were the types of things she stole. Food and children's clothing and diapers and formula and that sort of thing. She didn't go to jail. Rather, we sat around, elders, myself, lawyers, Crown Counsel, court workers, and we listened to her tell us about where she lived, the relationship she had with her children, her brothers and sisters, other people in her community. Although she had been in welfare for years, gone every month to collect her check, she really had no clue about the resources that were available to her, and, I might add, that she was entitled to. After hearing from everyone in the courtroom, she developed her own healing plan. First, she said that she agreed that she needed some counseling for herself and for her children for a variety of issues. There was a lot of trauma in her early years. She needed help with housing that was safe and clean. She needed specialized childcare, and she wanted to upgrade her education. It took about a year, and there was a lot of red tape. There was a lot of people who want the idea of a judge telling them what to do. There were paper chases. There were lost referrals. There were all the obstacles you can think of. But I have to say there was a lot of hard work on the part of the offender as well. Through the process of going through counseling, coming back for reviews, and plugging her into resources, actually right there in the courtroom, again, picking up the phone in the courtroom on the record and saying, why is this person not at the top of the list? An amazing thing happened. It was an amazing transformation. The woman was connected with specialized daycare for her youngest that actually is going to help that youngest with learning deficits and behavioral problems. The goal is to mainstream that child into a regular school. She has Aboriginal-based after-school care for her 2 school-aged children. She and her family, and she's been able to reunite with some of her other family members, and her children participate in family activities, spiritually based activities at a Native center. I can honestly say that the woman who walked into that courtroom a year earlier was a whole different person than the one I saw walk out of the courtroom that afternoon. The last thing she said to me was, "Thank you." She said that she never thought she could really do what she had only dreamt of. The second person I want to tell you about is, again, typical of a lot of the people we see in First Nations court. He too was in his mid-30s. He had a very dated or old criminal record. And that included break-and-enter charges and theft charges, things of that nature. But he was in First Nations court for break-and-enter and theft charges. And when you see a gap in a criminal record, it kind of makes you stop and wonder why that person was back. He had finished high school and earlier on in life had worked mostly in the construction industry. Along the way, during time in the construction industry, he developed a heroin addiction. Years ago, and I'm going to say 20 years ago now, he went into treatment, and after methadone, he managed to stay clean and sober for about 10 or 15 years. His grandmother passed away about 3 years ago, and his grandmother was the anchor. She was the glue that kept everybody together, and we all have grandmothers like that. I know. She passed away of old age, which was kind of nice for a change. He started using again because of the grief from the loss of his grandmother. In the course of using heroin and other street drugs, he lost his family, he lost his job, he lost his apartment, he lost everything. He said, "I even lost myself." Then, of course, to feed the drug habit, he turned to crime. So that's why the new charges and why the gap. By the time he got to First Nations court, he was back on methadone. And he knew exactly what he needed in his healing plan. He knew that he needed a home, he needed a job, he needed counseling about grief, substance abuse, and other issues. He was candid enough and smart enough to say, "I'm not going back into construction. Although I know I can make good money, I can do really well, I've got lots of jobs available to me. There are just too many drugs available on work sites. I can't take that temptation." So, one step at a time. He went into an Aboriginal recovery home. And about after 3 months, he felt he could safely leave. Through the people at the recovery home, he found a nice suite and obtained funding for retraining. His choice of work, youth counselor. Before his courses started, though, there was a bit of a waiting period. He planned to go back to Saskatchewan, where he was born. He had a teenage daughter there, and he had heard, through the rumor mill, that she was living on the streets. He intended to bring her back to Vancouver to live with him. He figured that with all he'd done and all he'd accomplished in life, he had all the skills he needed to help his daughter.